Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So today we will talk about the Kalam cosmological argument. This is a famous argument today, popularized by William Lane Craig. And here you can see the outline of the argument in 4 main premises, which implies that God exists as the conclusion. So just go over them briefly, and we will talk about the general context, its relation to Kalam, and focus on some parts of these premises in this lecture. The first premise states everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. This is basically the principle of causality stated here. The second premise says the universe began to exist. That means the universe is not eternal, it has a beginning. And the third statement is the conclusion that's derived from the first 2 premises, which is that the universe has a cause. And later comes another premise: if the universe has a cause, that cause is God. Now this 4th sentence identifies the cause of the universe with God. Therefore, conclusion, God exists. Now we will look at this argument in detail, but why it is called the Kalam cosmological argument by Lane Craig needs to be evaluated. Because when we look at the Kalam texts, certainly we can find something like that in those texts. But especially the first 3 sentences, everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. But this argument is known as Dalīl al-Ḥudūth. And the conclusion of this argument is not that God exists, as you can notice. It says that there is a cause. The universe is originated and there is an originator. The universe is muhtas and there is a muhtith. Okay? But this argument alone does not give us the existence of God. It needs to be put into a context of arguments to get this conclusion. And the general structure of the arguments in the Kalam text for the existence of God mainly has 3 parts. The first part aims to establish that there is at least one eternal or necessary being, which is the ultimate cause. The second part identifies this eternal or necessary being with a personal or volitional agent, al-Fa'il al-Mukhtar. And the last and final part states that there is at most one such personal or volitional, eternal or necessary being. Only after that you can call that being God or Allah. So if one part of these arguments is missing in your presentation, then you cannot call this being God. So God's existence needs to be justified step by step by paying close attention to each main conclusion stated here. Why? Because if you use just the Dalīl al-Ḥudūth for the existence of God, and we assume that Dalīl al-Ḥudūth is a sound argument, you can only arrive that there is at least one eternal being or a necessary being. By the way, the Mutakallimin use eternal and necessary interchangeably. This is why I use them here, both. Dalīl al-Ḥudūth only shows that there is at least one such being. But there might be other eternal or necessary beings? How can you block it? And additionally, that eternal or necessary being might not be a personal agent, having like will, knowledge, and power altogether. Consider the concept of God in the philosophical systems of al-Farabi and Ibn Sina. Certainly they describe this God with will, power, and knowledge, but their concept of will is not exactly the same as the mutakallimun's concept of will. This God, the God of philosophy, his will is determined by his knowledge of the perfect order in the universe. So God, in a sense, have to create or have to emanate this perfect order out itself, out himself. So this is an idea of emanation rather than free creation. There is no other way that he can not do that. But the Mutakallimun emphasizes the idea that God chooses among alternatives freely. This kind of freedom cannot be ascribed to the God of philosophy. In that sense, you need to separate this idea from the other concepts of God or other concepts of ultimate beings, how to say. And the second part of the argument serves for that purpose. And the final part, the third part, aims to show that there is at most one such being. That means there is no other second, third, or fourth, whatever, a plurality, a multitude of such beings. That means then there is only one such being. There is only one eternal volitional agent, not more than one. Only then you can call it God, because now you also establish the uniqueness claim. There is only one such a being. But if you do not establish it, then you may end up with polytheism or a model polytheism, how to say. There might be such eternal beings with volition. How can you block this possibility? You need to give an extra argument. In that sense, as you can see here, a better way to reformulate the Kalam cosmological argument, which is more authentic and aligned with the Kalam texts, is to have a meta-argument which has at least these three parts. But as we just look at Craig's version, this version does not have a part about divine uniqueness, for example. Craig doesn't give an argument to show that there is only one God. He tries to extend the argument by showing that God is a volitional agent because he created the universe out of nothing. It's not something that a natural causal agent can do, because there were non-existence and the beginning of existence. There needs to be some volitional execution of power to do it. However, Craig completely ignores the uniqueness argument in his presentation of the Kalam cosmological argument, and also Craig focuses only on Dalīl al-Ḥudūth in his formulation, which are about the first three statements. But the Mutakallimun does not only use Dalīl al-Ḥudūth, but they also use Dalīl al-Imkân. Last week, Hamza Karamali must have covered the Dalīl al-Imkân, so I will not talk about Dalīl al-Imkân in this section. However, Dalīl al-Imkân is another version of showing this first part here. There is at least one eternal being. So, Dalīl al-Ḥudūth or Dalīl al-𝐾𝐿, contingency argument or the argument from temporal origination, serve to purpose of showing that there is at least one eternal being. So, because of that, Craig's presentation of his argument as the Kalam cosmological argument is quite misleading, because it reveals the real surface, the real structure of the Kalam argument, the three main part of the Kalam argument. Also ignores the Dalīl al-𝐾𝐿, the argument from contingency, but which is also used in Kalam text to make the point that there is at least one eternal being. Therefore, if we try to understand the real Kalam cosmological argument, we can emphasize the following features. This argument starts from the universe, with the observation of the universe. This idea is called istidlal bi-shahid al-ghayb, an inference from the visible effect to an invisible cause. Therefore, it's cosmological. It is not ontological. The ontological arguments, the general type of ontological arguments as ascribed to Anselm, Descartes, and etc., later philosophers, start with the concept of God and tries to derive the existence of God from that concept only. They do not refer to the universe or include a premise about observation and a posteriori statements from the universe. Therefore, this is completely different in Kalam. I haven't seen, never witnessed any ontological type of argument in Kalam texts. So they are cosmological, they use cosmological arguments, but the cosmological argument is not only the Dalīl al-Ḥudūth or Dalīl al-𝐾𝐿. They are just parts of the meta-argument, have to say, given for the existence of God. These arguments must be supplemented with certain other arguments, such as showing that God is a volitional agent and also he is unique. Therefore, we have a meta-argument here, a cumulative argument that consists of many other arguments. In contemporary philosophy, the idea of cumulative arguments, using many arguments for the existence of God, is a trend, has been a trend. But it's usually formulated in the inductive way of inference. So they appeal to certain observed phenomena, and they combine them and try to offer a best explanation. They appeal, for example, the fine-tuning phenomena, certain other well-adapted things in the universe, consciousness, miracles, spiritual experiences. All together, they say, imply, or have to say, give us the sufficient evidence to argue for the existence of God as the best plausible explanation of them. But the Mutakallimun's way of arguing is quite different, which I try to underline one more time. Their arguments are not inductive or abductive. They use deductive arguments. And in the golden standard, Burhani or demonstrative type, the premises are true and the statements coming from the a posteriori or a priori knowledge are evident, and all the other premises are based on that, and the inference is deductively valid. Then you get the conclusion. So in that sense, they try to establish the existence of God not with some kind of probability, but with some kind of certainty, which is a metaphysical certainty, not scientific certainty, metaphysical certainty. Okay? So, after this introduction and distinguishing Craig's version of the Kalam argument from the real Kalam argument, we may now focus on the content of Craig's presentation of Dalīl al-Ḥudūth. So the argument has basically two premises. One states that everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence, and the second premise states that the universe began to exist, from which we derive the conclusion that the universe is a cause of its existence. Now, this argument is valid if you accept the first two premises. You have to accept that the conclusion follows necessarily from them. But the question now is whether these premises are true or not. And Craig gives several arguments to justify these premises. The first premise is about causality. And the way the principle of causality is formulated, look at it, everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. It's a restricted principle of causality. It doesn't say everything has a cause, okay? Be careful. It says everything that begins to exist has a cause. Like every muhtath, every hadith being has a sabab, okay? Now, Craig initially uses two main types of justification, but then the arguments are extended in his later writings. One justification is a priori, the other is a posteriori. So Craig uses, for example, the basic metaphysical principle that ex nihilo nihil fit. I mean, from nothing come nothing. Something that exists cannot come from nothing. This is a metaphysical principle that goes back to ancient Greece, for example. It's known a priori, Craig says, and it's self-evidentially true. But he also uses an inductive type of argument to justify causality. He says, I mean, look around. You always explain something with certain causes. Something happens, you need to specify certain causes to explain why it happens. It's everywhere in life, everywhere in science. So we use that principle as a piece of common sense knowledge. But this argument, notice, is inductive. So, and also, in a sense, problematic because especially with respect to the Kalam and Mutakallimun, because it assumes correlation or interprets correlation with causation. So whenever you drink water, when you are thirsty, you think water heals your thirst. It is the causality of water that makes some changes in your emotions. But the Mutakallimun are quite skeptical to such kind of ascriptions of causality. They think there are correlations between events and certain states of beings, but there is no evidence to show that there is causal relation between them. Either you appeal to observation or reason. You cannot close the gap between correlation and causation. But this is what the Ash'arites and Maturidists usually think. On the contrary, the Mu'tazila appeals to an inductive justification of causality. The Mu'tazila in general think causality is something experienced, especially within the human beings. The humans, with their wills, cause certain actions, and this is how humans experience causality in the world. Remember their famous doctrine of the creation of human acts. افعال العباد, humans create their actions. Since this is a very, strong claim, many mutakallimun from the Ash'arites and Maturidi traditions or schools criticize this. And even if you will something and it happens with your bodily actions, still you observe correlation. You do not observe that your will cause those actions. You observe only that you will it, then it happens with your bodily action. You want to drink water, you intend to get the water and raise your hand and take the bottle of water and drink it. Okay? But you observe the action and desire or intention correlated with each other. You don't see exactly the causality here. And also consider the following case in which you imagine a person who is paralyzed while he was very healthy, but at a certain point in his life, in her life, she was paralyzed. She wants to remove or move to her finger, but she couldn't do that. The correlation doesn't work here, but it was working before. Now you can see that will doesn't have inherent causality. If the will had an inherent causality, he wouldn't lose it. So, in a sense, Craig's justification of the principle of causality aligns more with the Mu'tazila school than the Ash'ari or Maturidi. This is the first premise. Now we move to the second premise. So the second premise is about temporal origination. I think there is a question. Muhammad Mizanur?
Yes, thank you, Ustadh. I was just wondering, how does the contingency argument align with or is compatible with the correlation and causation thing? Because being contingent obviously has either a correlational or a causational relationship. Which one is it actually?
Thank you very much. Good question. So the contingency argument relies on the fact of contingency and the principle of causality. So there are contingent beings around. Indeed, the contingence of those beings is known through their temporal origination. For example, it is now raining outside here in Boston, okay? But it was not raining 1 hour ago. This is a new beginning of certain events, raining. So if this event were necessary, it wouldn't be existent 1 hour ago. It must have been always that way, okay? Therefore, it is not necessary since it is a beginning. It has a beginning. It is not impossible either, because if it were impossible, it wouldn't rain. But it is raining now, therefore it is possible. It is possible, but it was not the case that it is always the case. There were times in which there is no raining. There were times in which there is raining. it is called technically contingent. But since this event, contingent events, could both exist and not exist, and in actuality, one is the case. Here now it is raining. Then why it is raining rather than not, since both options are acceptable or legitimately applicable to the reality? You need to accept a cause to explain why it's raining rather than not. But the Mutakallimun, especially Ash'arites or Maturidites, if you look at Al-Ghazali's al-Iqtisad fil I'tiqad, you will see there. He says that there must be a cause, but he doesn't say what kind of being is this cause. There must be a cause, but he doesn't say the clouds are the cause. It doesn't say, some winds are the cause. We know that there is a cause in an a priori way, not by observation, but by analyzing the concept of contingency and arriving the concept of causality. This is an a priori justification. And the contingency argument relies on this argument. The principle of causality is not justified by observation of causal links in the universe. Causality is inferred by something contingent. And then you consider all the possibilities afterwards. You observe a contingent being, whether it is possible that this contingent being could be explained by some other contingent beings, whether these contingent beings could form an infinity. All these options, after all these options, you end up with the following conclusion. Even if there are infinitely many contingent beings which even cause each other, still the first contingent being is not causally explained completely. There must be some necessary being as the ultimate causal ground to complete the explanation of the first contingent being. By the way, notice we do not say these contingent beings cause each other or form an infinity. We say, even if this is the case, the argument works. Okay? So the second premise about temporal origination. This is that the universe began to exist. Craig offers two different kinds of justification for this principle. The first kind is philosophical, which is purely a priori justification. The second one is scientific, which appeals to latest scientific theories to justify it. And the Mutakallimun here doesn't justify this premise by some kind of, scientific or observational justification, but they also appeal to philosophical justification, a priori justification, how to say. And the philosophical arguments are two types, again, offered by Craig. The first one is about the impossibility of actual infinity, and we will see the second, but will not able to examine the details. It is about forming an actual infinity, impossibility of forming an actual infinity. And today we will not be able to cover the scientific arguments, because there will be another section in this course to look at the theories of Big Bang and their relation to theistic arguments. So we limit our focus especially to this first argument to understand what is going on here and the concept of actual infinity and the relevant concepts to understand the basic significant philosophical idea behind it. So the first argument states that in the first premise, an actual infinity cannot exist in reality. Second premise, an infinite temporal regress of events forms an actual infinity. And conclusion, an infinite temporal regress of events cannot exist. Thus, the totality of events, namely the universe, has a beginning. In order to understand this argument, we need to clarify what actual infinity means, what potential infinity means, and how they are distinguished. And then we will look at the modern discussions about these types of infinity, especially that starts with Cantor's set theory. And then there is a distinction here that is important to understand the force of the argument in question. The actual infinity that concerns numbers, concepts, and ideas, an actual infinity that concerns concrete things, objects, and events. Craig formulated his argument and used here in the first premise by saying an actual infinity cannot exist in reality. That's not redundant here. He says in reality means, he means actual infinity concerning concrete things, objects, and events are impossible. He doesn't say actual infinity concerning numbers, concepts, or ideas is impossible. He allows the possibility of actual infinity in the first type with numbers, concept of ideas, but not in the second type. And also, when we look at the Kalam texts, the Mutakellimun, early Mutakellimun, do not make this distinction clearly, actual infinity concerning numbers and concepts versus actual infinity concerning concrete things, objects, and events. But later, Mutakellimun make that distinction. We can see it, for example, in the text of al-Taftazani. He, likewise, Craig, states actual infinity concerning numbers or concepts is not impossible, but actual infinity concerning concrete things is impossible. So this distinction is also made by the later Mutakellimun.